The red and blue lights slashed across the flickering liquor and deli sign as rain drummed softly against the awning, the low hum of a generator vibrating through the ground beneath my boots. My hand, slick with sweat and adrenaline, gripped the mouse as I scrolled back through the grainy security footage of the corner store robbery. 4 cameras, dirty angles, timestamps skipping like a broken heartbeat. On camera 2, a hooded figure crossed the freezer aisle. On 3, a shadow leaned against the register. On 1, my breath caught. The face turned half-profile, a lightning-shaped scar cutting across the right brow, and that familiar tick, touching his left ear before speaking. 3 years ago, I zipped the black body bag over that very face. I watched the zipper climb. I signed the report. But now there he was, pulling down his mask, lifting his chin, staring straight into the lens as if staring into me. His lips formed my name. The radio burst against my shoulder. Unit, movement in the back room. I froze the tape. Hit play again. In the freezer's reflection, a shadow slid past the counter, behind me, at that same moment. The footage wasn't just recorded, it was live. And the man I buried was inside that store, with me. I was born in a small town in the heart of Missouri, where the dust of dirt roads mixed with the smell of corn and gasoline, and where life seemed to repeat itself until the day it didn't anymore. My father was a Vietnam veteran who carried a heavy silence on his shoulders that taught me early how to live with the absence of answers. He rarely spoke about what he saw, but the rigid look in his eyes was enough to show me that some scars never fade, even when the skin heals. My mother was a nurse, and from her, I inherited the habit of noticing the details no one else did. A breath out of rhythm, a lost stare, a gesture that betrays a lie. I grew up between those two forces, the iron discipline of a soldier and the nearly invisible sensitivity of someone who heals the wounds of others. When I chose the police, it wasn't for glory or out of some heroic vocation. It was out of a need to understand the order behind chaos, to give meaning to the violence that surrounded me since childhood. I've always been obsessed with patterns, voices that repeat themselves in confessions, footprints that align in a chase, faces that come back in my dreams when I should have long forgotten them. Over time, that became less of a skill and more of a curse. My colleagues called me the human radar, but deep down, I knew that sensitivity carried a cost. Carrying every case, every victim, every desperate gaze was like collecting invisible scars. I stood out quickly in investigations, especially in homicides, because I had a knack for connecting the dots where others only saw noise. But with every solved case, a part of me was lost. Divorce came quickly, inevitably, with one accusation ringing true. I wasn't home anymore, even when I was there. My ex-wife used to say I slept with my eyes open, that the dinner table was just an extension of the interrogation room. She wasn't wrong. The job wasn't just what I did, it was who I was, and I no longer knew how to separate the two. The deaths of fellow officers left deep cracks as well. I buried too many partners before I hit 40, and each funeral sounded like a warning. The next one could be you. But what truly haunts me isn't the bullets fired. It's the ghosts that remain alive inside me. Certain faces appear in every alley, every reflection, and it's impossible not to feel like they're still here, walking right beside me. That's what broke me years ago when I closed the case of the man who should have stayed buried. A cold, calculating criminal, one of the few who ever challenged me on a psychological battlefield. Confirming his death should have been a relief, but instead it tasted bitter, like something unfinished. Since then, I've lived with constant mistrust. Nothing is ever final. No one is ever truly out of the game. I learned not to trust the obvious, to doubt even what I'd signed in reports myself. My personal life turned into silence, my apartment into a mausoleum of case files, and my routine into endless shifts that kept me just distracted enough not to think too much. And it was in that state, half man, half shadow, surviving between reports and cold coffee, that I replayed those tapes. The feeling wasn't just shock. It was as if the past had torn down my door, and stormed back in. Because for me, every unsolved case isn't a closed file. It's an open wound. And when I saw that face on the convenience store cameras, I realized the wound I'd tried hardest to hide was about to bleed all over again. It was a heavy night, the kind where the city feels suspended between silence and despair. The radio on my dashboard crackled with static and overlapping voices, patrol cars chasing smaller calls, bar fights, domestic disturbances, petty thefts that repeated like a broken clock. I was parked outside a closed diner, sipping cold coffee from a thermos, when the tone of the dispatcher's voice shifted. I know that sound the way a soldier knows the click of a trigger. A half step higher, sharper, not routine. Any available unit, 10 to 90 in progress, convenience store at 12th and Jefferson, reports of break-in, possible hostage, cameras live, urgent. The first thing I felt wasn't adrenaline, it was a weight in my gut. The kind of warning you learn to respect. 12th. And Jefferson wasn't just another dot on the map. It was a zone we all knew too well. Gangs, back alley deals, suspects who always slipped through for lack of evidence. Any call there was never what it seemed. I took a breath, flicked the siren just once to announce movement, and pressed the accelerator. The streets were slick, neon reflections swimming across the asphalt, and every intersection felt like I was driving deeper into something inevitable. As I drove, the radio spit fragments of intel. A clerk managed to dial before being subdued. A witness saw two masked men enter armed. A parking lot camera caught a car with no plates. I logged every detail in my mind, piecing the puzzle in seconds, but something didn't add up. Time. Always time. The call came too fast, too precise. It felt less like a coincidence and more like a setup. I requested backup, but command answered that units were tied up across town. I'd be first on scene, maybe the only one for several. Minutes. Minutes in these cases stretch like hours. The heart doesn't race because of bullets. It races because you know every decision will echo. In reports, in courtrooms, and most of all, in your conscience. When I turned the corner and saw the glowing facade of the Liquor and Dealy, the scene already felt staged. The glass door half open, the sign flickering with failing wiring, and a strange silence blanketing the block, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. No movement on the street, no passing cars. Just the unmistakable sense I was being pulled into something bigger than a robbery. The radio burst again. Unit 47, interior cameras confirm 3 individuals. 2 near the counter, 1 at the rear exit. Warning, possible 4th suspect outside the frame. Proceed with caution. That phrase, unidentified suspect, echoed in my skull. There's always one detail that doesn't fit. One shadow unaccounted for. And it's in that void where my instincts scream the loudest. Adjusting my vest and checking my weapon, I thought about what brought me here. Years of service, ghosts that never left, and the gnawing suspicion that fate has a cruel way of replaying lessons you failed to learn. I was supposed to enter that store as just another cop responding to a call. But I knew, deep down, this wasn't just about armed men and hostages. This was personal. This was unfinished business. The call had gone out as a robbery in progress. But in my bones, I understood. Tonight wasn't about criminals or cash registers. Tonight was about facing a ghost I thought I had buried. And I was about to cross that threshold. I killed the siren the moment I pulled up a few yards from the store's entrance. The echo of red and blue still pulsed against the rain-slicked windshields of abandoned cars along the curb, as if the city itself was throbbing in warning. I stepped out into the cold air, the wind slicing my face and carrying with it the strange blend of gasoline and stale bread, a smell that didn't belong, as if even the air wanted me to know something was off. Every step toward the sidewalk landed louder than it should have, and the feeling grew stronger. It wasn't just criminals waiting inside. It was eyes, watching, measuring. The facade of the Liquor and Deli looked like the set of a worn-out movie, neon sputtering in red, letters failing, the half-open glass door tapping lightly in the wind. Wet footprints tracked inward across the pavement, broad, dragging, Steps, and smaller ones too, almost childlike. My first impression wasn't chaos, but calculated disorder. No shattered glass, no signs of struggle outside. Whoever came here knew the ground, or wanted it to look controlled. I held my weapon tight and moved toward the side window. Through the grimy glass, I saw toppled shelves, scattered goods, a broken whiskey bottle glinting like a jagged mirror. But what froze me wasn't the mess. It was the silence. No cries, no shouts, no muffled scuffling that usually marks a robbery in progress. Just a silence too heavy, too wrong, sticking to my skin like static. The radio crackled faintly. Unit 47, camera 3 is offline. Repeat, camera 3 is down. My eyes shut for a split second. A dead camera means deliberate movement. Someone inside knew the blind spots. Someone knew I was coming. Then, metal clattered. A can rolling, striking a shelf. Not an accident, a distraction. I spun toward the sound, shoulders pressed to a rack, fingers steady on the E. Trigger. Nothing. Just a narrow aisle scattered with open boxes. But the weight of unseen breathing filled the space. And then came the whisper. A low voice from the counter area. Gravelly, raspy, as though it slid right into my ear. You came. I've been waiting. My pulse slammed. That voice. Recognition hit like a blow to the chest. Impossible, yet undeniable. I edged forward, catching sight of two figures by the register. One forcing the clerk to his knees with a gun pressed to his temple, the other rifling the cash drawer with frantic hands. But what locked me in place wasn't them. It was the shadow behind them reflected in the glass of a refrigerator door. A scar above the brow. That same arrogant posture that once taunted me across interrogation tables. His eyes lifted, and for a heartbeat, mine met his in the reflection. The world shrank. The buzz of lights, the drip of spilled liquor, the clerk's trembling sobs, all vanished. Only one truth remained. I was staring at a man I'd zipped into a body bag. A man officially buried, and now he stood breathing, smiling with the contempt of someone who had crawled back from the grave just to haunt me. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The urge to retreat, to wait for backup, clashed with every instinct I had, but there was no waiting. Not now. My past had ripped open the door and was pulling me inside. I braced against the wall, vest tight against my chest, weapon up, heartbeat drumming like a war drum. Standing at the threshold, I knew this wasn't just another robbery. It was the beginning of a night carved into my bones. Because in that silence, in that sour mix of blood and bread, I realized I wasn't stepping into a store. I was stepping straight into the heart of a past that refused to stay buried. And once I crossed that doorway, there would be no turning back. I pushed the glass door open with my shoulder, its high-pitched creak slicing through the silence like a blade. Inside, the liquor and deli was swallowed in a flickering gloom, fluorescent tubes buzzing in irregular pulses that made the shadows twitch and crawl across toppled shelves. Each step I took echoed too loudly, crunching over shattered glass and crushed packaging, as if the store itself were announcing my presence. The sharp stench of spilled liquor mixed with stale sweat, but beneath it lingered that metallic tang I knew too well, the smell of fresh blood, faint but undeniable. I moved down the narrow freezer aisle, gun raised, tight to my chest. My reflection warped and cracked in the broken glass, and for an instant I thought I was staring at my own face. But then I caught it, something that wasn't mine, a blur. A shape slipping across the edge of the reflection. Someone was close. The pulse in my throat hammered as my instinct screamed I was no longer alone. The radio hissed on my shoulder. Unit 47, camera 3 lost signal. Repeat, camera 3 offline. My jaw clenched. A dead camera wasn't coincidence. Whoever was in here knew what they were doing. They understood blind spots. They knew how to erase themselves. And worse, they knew I was inside. A sudden clatter, metal striking tile, a can rolling, bouncing, spinning into a shelf. Not an accident. A lure. I swung toward the noise, pressed myself into cover, finger on the trigger. The aisle was empty. Boxes scattered, shadows stretching long. but the weight of invisible footsteps pressed against me. Then I heard it, a voice, low and gravelly, cutting through the air as if it was meant for me alone. "You came. I was waiting." My heart seized. That voice, familiar, carved into my memory like a scar. Impossible, but there. I turned the corner and saw two of them at the register. One had the clerk on his knees, the barrel of his gun digging into the man's temple. The other ripped at the cash drawer, bills spilling like fallen leaves. But my eyes weren't on them. My eyes were locked on the shadow behind them, reflected in the chilled glass of the refrigerator door, the scar above the brow, the same arrogant tilt of the head that once haunted interrogation rooms. And then it happened. His eyes lifted, meeting mine in the reflection, and the whole store seemed to collapse inward. The buzzing lights, the sobs of the clerk, the drip of liquor on the tiles, all gone. Only that face remained. The face I had watched vanish into a black body bag. The face I had signed off as dead. The armed robber jerked toward me, yanking the hostage tighter, shouting something I barely heard. Another spun, raising his weapon, firing wild. I dove behind the candy rack, shards flying, wood splintering as bullets punched holes through sugar and plastic. The air filled with the acrid burn of gunpowder. Instinct took over. I fired back, controlled bursts precise, aiming not to kill but to break their cover. Shelves toppled, cereal exploded in puffs. The hostage screamed, chaos swallowing everything. But above it all, beyond the ringing in my ears, the gunfire, the panic, he remained. That figure in the reflection, calm, watching, smiling faintly, as though orchestrating the violence like a conductor at his podium. In that instant, I understood. This wasn't about the robbery. This wasn't about the hostages or the cash. This was about him, about the impossible made flesh, about a ghost returned to remind me that nothing was finished. The store had become a cage, a trap designed to pull me into the very heart of madness. And there, crouched in the wreckage, smoke burning my lungs and my sanity cracking at the edges, I felt the most terrifying thought of all. Was I staring at the truth, or finally losing my grip on it? The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun. What followed was a silence so heavy it pressed against my eardrums harder than the echo of the shots. The smoke from burnt powder hung in the air, shifting under the stutter of the failing fluorescent lights, each flicker casting the store in a different nightmare. I crouched behind the candy display, my grip slick with sweat, the steel of my weapon trembling under the weight of something far greater than fear. Then came the sound, measured, deliberate footsteps. Not the frantic shuffle of desperate thieves, but something steady, familiar, a rhythm I knew. My chest tightened as memories of interrogation rooms came flooding back, the cadence of a man who never hurried, who made every pause into a weapon. I lifted my head slowly, heart pounding, and then I saw him. He was standing behind the counter, whole, breathing, smirking. The man I'd zipped into a body bag, the man whose death certificate carried my signature. The scar over the right brow, the unkempt beard, the same predatory arrogance in his eyes. There was no mistaking him. He was alive. My mind scrambled for logic. A twin? A double? Some trick? But then he raised his hand and scratched behind his left ear, the same infuriating tick I'd watched for months. That one gesture shattered any possibility of doubt. It was him, alive, defiant, smiling at me like death itself had bent to his will. The two robbers near the register froze at his presence. One still clung to the hostage, gun shaking, while the other held a drawer spilling cash. He leaned toward them, said something too low for me to hear. Whatever the words, they were enough. The man with the gun loosened his grip instantly, as if compelled by a higher power. The hostage trembled, then whispered words that cut deeper than any bullet. He came back. I saw him die, but he came back. Those words tore through me. It wasn't just my eyes betraying me. Others saw it too. This wasn't madness. It was real. The radio hissed in my ear, command barking for an update, but I couldn't answer. My throat locked, my hand frozen against the mic. What could I say? That a dead man had returned? That the rules of life and death had been broken in a corner store on Jefferson? No report could hold the truth. He looked at me again. This time, no smirk. His lips moved slowly, deliberately. I read the word clear as daylight. Unfinished. That was when I knew. This was never just a robbery. It was a message, a summons, a reminder that the story I thought I'd ended years ago had only been paused. Then chaos returned. The back door slammed. One robber bolted into the night. The hostage scrambled across the tiles. Shouts, panic, the sound of running feet. But all of it blurred into static, because the only thing that mattered was him, standing there, alive, mocking the grave I'd buried him in. I felt the floor tilt under me. Everything I believed, reports, autopsies, the very system I served, crumbled in an instant. If he was alive, then my career had been built on a lie. If he was dead and I was hallucinating, then I had already lost my mind. Either way, I was finished. In that moment, I realized the robbery was just smoke. The real crime was much bigger, and the real prisoner was me. Because the most shocking discovery of all wasn't just that a dead man was breathing again. It was the truth behind it. Ghosts can bleed, and the dead don't always stay buried. For a few endless seconds, I was frozen. His image standing there, breathing, moving, smiling. It wasn't just a shock. It was a rupture in the very fabric of reality I had built my life on. Inside me, two forces collided like tectonic plates. Reason, screaming that this was impossible, and instinct, whispering that deep down, I had always known something about that case was wrong. And in that space between logic and gut, I felt myself split open, staring into the cracks of my own sanity. Memories slammed into me out of order, like shards of glass. The morgue, the zipper closing over his face, the acrid sting of formaldehyde, the weight of the pen as I signed the report, confirming his death. I remembered the hollow relief I felt, telling myself the nightmare was finally over. But along with that memory came others. The hurried looks from my superiors, the eagerness to close the file, answers handed to me too quickly. Now, with him alive before my eyes, the question ripped through me. Was I deceived? Or did I choose the lie because I needed him gone? My pulse was erratic, not from fear of being shot, but from the collapse happening inside me. I had built my entire identity on being the one who saw beyond, who connected dots others ignored, who never let details slip. And yet maybe I had walked right into the biggest trap of all, believing the why obvious, signing off on the death of a man who had never died. The thought hollowed me out, because it meant my pride, my so-called gift, had blinded me. Doubt spread like wildfire. Had he always been alive, shielded by someone higher up? Was the whole system rotten, complicit in covering his tracks? Or was it worse? Was I unraveling, seeing ghosts because my own mind was fractured beyond repair? That last possibility terrified me more than any bullet ever could, because if my perception was gone, then everything I was, every instinct, every case, every decision was a lie. My arm shook, not from fear of dying, but from the unbearable weight of those choices. If he was alive, then my past was a fraud. If he was dead and I was hallucinating, then I was finished. Either way, I lost. And beneath all of it lay a deeper wound. This man wasn't just another criminal. He was the one who had dragged me into a war of wills. Months of pursuit, nights without sleep, poisonous dialogues in interrogation, rooms that bent every part of me. He knew me, knew my limits, my weaknesses, my doubts. He had always played me like a chessboard, and now he was back to reopen the same scar I thought I'd buried. My father's words came back to me, heavy as lead. The worst enemies aren't the ones shooting at you. They're the ones that survive inside your head. He was right. And here he was, flesh and blood, proving it. My hands were slick with sweat, slipping against the grip of my weapon. My mind screamed, pull the trigger, end it, erase this torment. But my heart hesitated, because some part of me needed answers. Some part of me needed to know how and why. And some part of me was terrified of what the truth would reveal, that maybe I myself had played a role in letting this happen. Standing there, trapped between narrow aisles and shifting shadows, I realized the deadliest enemy in that store wasn't him. It was me, the man who once believed he was incorruptible, unshakable, now fractured, teetering between hunter and prey. And the cruelest truth of all pressed in on me. I no longer knew if I was still a cop searching for justice, or just another broken man enslaved by his own ghost. The scene before me felt frozen in time. The hostage on his knees, two gunmen still holding their ground but shaken, and him, the ghost that shouldn't exist, watching me with a calmness that was more terrifying than any weapon. Inside me, chaos raged. My finger rested on the trigger, every instinct demanding I fire, end this once and for all. After all, wasn't that the simplest path? One shot, quick, final. The man who had haunted me would fall, and I could return to the comfort of certainty, even if it was certainty soaked in blood. But something held me back. Maybe it was his stare, filled with that silent provocation, daring me to choose the easy way out. Maybe it was the instinct I had spent years sharpening, the one that whispered the truth. Killing him wouldn't give me peace. It would only bury the questions deeper. And I needed answers more than I needed victory. He stepped forward, ignoring the chaos around us, ignoring the guns, the trembling hands, the hostages' muffled sobs. "You know it's not that simple," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. The words sliced into me, because he was right. Nothing about this was simple. If I pulled the trigger, I would spend the rest of my life haunted by the uncertainty of who he really was, how he had come back, who had protected him. I wouldn't be killing a man. I'd be killing the only chance to learn the truth. The weight of that realization broke something inside me. Slowly, deliberately, I lowered my weapon. Not all the way, not enough to look weak, but enough to signal that I wasn't going to finish this with a bullet. It was the most dangerous choice I could make, and I knew it. It could cost me the hostage's life. It could cost me mine, but it was a choice I couldn't avoid. And then he smiled. That infuriating, triumphant smile. He knew me. He knew that my obsession with the truth was stronger than my instinct to kill. In that moment, I understood I was playing his game, standing exactly where he wanted me, vulnerable, desperate, willing to break my own rules. The robber holding the hostage grew agitated, pressing the gun harder against the man's temple. I snapped, shouting, "Let him go!" My voice thundered, not just for the criminal, but for myself, as if demanding proof that my decision wasn't weakness. The ghost raised a hand, calm and commanding, and the robber faltered. The grip loosened. The hostage slipped free. That single gesture confirmed it all. He was in control. Not me, not command. Him. And in that instant, I realized the magnitude of my choice. By sparing him, I had traded away the upper hand. I wasn't the hunter anymore. I was the one chasing shadows, the one bound to a game I didn't understand. But I also knew this. I couldn't live with doubt. Doubt would eat me, alive faster than any bullet. If I wanted to survive, not just as a cop, but as a man, I needed the truth, even if it destroyed me. So I made my decision. I would keep him alive, follow him into the darkness, tear apart every lie until I understood. I wasn't here to win tonight. I was here to begin. In that moment, I ceased being just an officer answering a call. I became a man stepping willingly into obsession, and I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that nothing in my life would ever be the same. Again. The silence after my choice lasted less than a second, but it was enough to change everything. The gunman holding the hostage, confused by the ghost's subtle hand signal, loosened his grip. The hostage seized the moment, crawling desperately toward the door. Adrenaline ignited the room like fire. One of the thieves fired wildly in panic, and I reacted on instinct, squeezing off controlled shots. He crashed back into a shelf of canned goods, metal clattering to the floor in a metallic avalanche. The other bolted through the rear exit, vanishing into the dark. Chaos erupted. Screams, footsteps, the hiss of the radio, the distant wail of approaching sirens. It all collapsed into a blur, but he didn't move. He stood there, calm, steady, his eyes fixed on me. In that stillness, I understood the cruel truth. The robbery, the gunman, the hostage, they were distractions. The real story was him. The entire night had been orchestrated for this moment, this confrontation. The hostage stumbled into the street, collapsing into the arms of a bystander. Relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. Instead, a different weight pressed down. I had spared him, and by sparing him, I'd surrendered control. Reinforcements were seconds away, and when they stormed in, how would I explain? How do you report the presence of a man who doesn't exist anymore, a man officially dead? The system doesn't allow for ghosts, and I was about to be written off as unstable, or worse, a liar. The radio on my shoulder barked, "Unit 47, back up in 30 seconds. Status?" My thumb hovered over the mic. What could I say? The dead walk among us? He's alive? The words jammed in my throat. At last, I forced out the safe lie. Hostage safe. 2 suspects. 1 down, 1 fleeing. Request perimeter. The kind of clean report that fits neatly into the system. And in speaking it, I sealed the first conscious lie of the night. He stepped closer, just as the glow of sirens washed over the storefront. His voice was low, almost intimate, and it gutted me. They won't believe you. They never did. More devastating than a bullet, because it was true. I was alone with the truth, and the truth had no place in the official record. Then the cavalry arrived. Tires screeched, doors slammed, boots pounded pavement. Officers stormed into the store, weapons raised, voices shouting commands. And just like that, he was gone. No trace, no body, no shadow, as if he'd evaporated into the smoke. The sergeant grabbed my arm, his eyes sharp. Status? I repeated my lie. Calm, professional, rehearsed. 2 suspects, 1 neutralized, 1 in flight. Hostage secure. Teams swept the aisles, searched the back, checked every corner. Nothing. The phantom had disappeared. And in that absence came the avalanche of consequences. Officially, I was a cop who'd done his duty. 1 robber dead, 1 escaped, 1 hostage saved. But in reality, I was the sole witness to the impossible. No one else saw him. No camera captured him. No trace remained but in my memory. I was alone, holding a truth that the system would never accept. Outside, under the swirl of red and blue lights, the hostage was loaded into an ambulance. The sergeant looked at me, suspicion hardening his stare. "You look rattled. What the hell happened in there?" I opened my mouth, searching for words, but the only ones that came out were, "It's not over." And in that moment, I understood. My choice to let him live hadn't just altered the outcome of the night. It had condemned me, because now I wasn't just chasing a fugitive. I was hunting a ghost, and no one, not my partners, not my commanders, not even the law itself, would ever believe me. I was truly, utterly alone. The precinct buzzed with its usual late-night noise. Phones ringing, typewriters clacking, detectives muttering over files. But for me, it was all muffled, distant, as if I were underwater. The stack of reports on my desk blurred before my eyes. The cold coffee at my elbow untouched. Every line I wrote was sterile, technical, safe. But inside, the truth clawed to get out. How could I record the impossible? How could I write that a man I buried 3 years ago had stood in front of me, breathing, watching, smiling? No report could contain that. No system would accept it. A knock came at the door, soft, deliberate. It was Thomas, my old partner. He'd transferred to another division years back, but he remained one of the few people I trusted. He closed the door behind him and leaned against the wall, studying me with that look only he had, the one that cut straight through pretense. For a long moment, he said nothing. He didn't need to. He could see the weight crushing me. "You saw something in there, didn't you?" His voice was low, careful, almost like a confession. I swallowed hard. "Depends what you call something," I answered, my throat dry. He dragged a chair across the floor and sat directly in front of me. "Don't play games, Mike. I know that. Look, it's the same one you had when you closed his case." My pulse spiked. He didn't have to say the name. We both knew. I leaned forward, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I saw him. He was there." The words left my mouth heavy as lead. I expected disbelief, mockery, maybe pity. But what I saw on Thomas's face was worse. Recognition. He was silent for a long moment, jaw tight. Finally, he spoke. "You're not the first." The room tilted. "What do you mean, not the first?" Thomas leaned in, his eyes locked on mine. In the past few months, 2 other agents swore they saw him too. Different places, different circumstances. Always fleeting, always unprovable. And you know what happened to them? Evaluations, suspensions. They're gone now, off the force, branded unstable. The floor seemed to vanish under me. It wasn't just me. I wasn't insane. Others had seen the same ghost, carried the same burden, and the system had swallowed them whole, erased them as liabilities. Thomas's voice hardened. "He's alive, Mike. And if he's alive, someone powerful is making sure he stays that way. We didn't bury a body. We buried a lie, and now he's back. I don't know why. I don't know for what. But he's back." The silence that followed was suffocating. I stared at the desk, my knuckles white around the pen. "Why now?" I asked. He exhaled, shaking his head. "Maybe he never left. Maybe he's been waiting in the dark all along. And maybe you're the reason he's showing his face now." The words hit harder than any bullet. Until that moment, I had seen myself as unlucky, caught in the crossfire of something unfinished. But now I understood. I wasn't just a bystander. I was the target. That conversation shattered the last illusions I had. I realized I couldn't rely on the system, couldn't file the truth into a neat report and expect justice to follow. Any move within the rules would destroy me. If I wanted answers, I'd have to chase them outside the lines in shadows, where no badge could protect me. Thomas stood, hand on the doorknob, and left me with one last warning. "If you go after him, you'll bleed for it. But know this, he didn't come back to haunt you. He came back to finish you." And with that, the world I thought I knew collapsed. I wasn't just a cop closing cases anymore. I was a marked man, drawn into a war against a ghost the system refused to see. The days that followed blurred together. The city moved on, its usual crimes, its midnight sirens, its endless carousel of bar fights and domestic disputes, but none of it touched me. I walked the same streets, sat in the same patrol car, filled out the same reports, yet everything felt foreign, hollow. Something inside me had cracked that night in the liquor store, and no amount of procedure, no cup of burnt coffee, could put the pieces back together. I spent sleepless nights replaying every frame in my mind. The way his face emerged in the reflection, the scar over his brow, the smirk like a dagger, and then that single word mouthed in silence, unfinished. It was more than a message. It was a wound, ripped open and left to bleed. For years I had convinced myself his death was the closure I needed, but the truth I saw in that store told me otherwise. That case hadn't ended. It had been buried alive. Thomas's words lingered with me too. Knowing others had seen him, knowing I wasn't the only one haunted, brought me some relief, but also a greater dread, because those others, they were gone now, silenced, discarded. That was the fate waiting for me if I tried to tell the truth. The system doesn't tolerate ghosts. It erases them, and anyone who speaks of them. I started digging through the old case files. Dusty boxes, photographs yellowed at the edges, reports that smelled of stale ink and rot. At first, it was just to reassure myself I hadn't imagined it. But the more I read, the clearer it became. The cracks were everywhere. Dates that didn't line up. Witnesses whose statements were never revisited. Evidence that vanished between one report and the next. The more I uncovered, the more I realized I hadn't failed alone. I'd been steered, used, turned into the signature that sealed a coffin with nothing inside. That revelation cut deeper than anything else. I wasn't the sharp-eyed detective I had always believed myself to be. I was a cog in a machine that thrived on lies, a tool to give false closure. And the pride I carried in seeing what others couldn't, it had blinded me to the biggest deception of all. But the pain also changed me. For the first time in years, I looked at my reflection and didn't see just a weary cop, worn down by shifts and funerals. I saw a man at war, not with criminals on street corners, but with the very system I swore to serve. My father's words came back to me. The worst enemies are the ones that live inside your head. Now I understood. The ghost wasn't just him. It was the lie I'd lived by. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with the city lights flickering beyond the window, I made peace with one truth. There was no going back. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't keep writing sanitized reports while swallowing the poison of what I knew. If he was alive, if someone had kept him alive, then my only mission was to drag that truth into the open, no matter the cost. Transformation is never clean. It's violent. It tears away everything you thought you were. I was no longer the officer who prided himself on patterns and precision. Was a man obsessed, chasing a phantom who refused to stay dead. My code, my beliefs, my sense of duty, all of it was reshaped that night. And for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than exhaustion: purpose. The obsession was no longer a curse, it was fuel. The wound was no longer weakness, it was a weapon. If they wanted to stop me, they'd have to bury me for real. Because until then, I wouldn't stop. Not until I stripped every secret out of the shadows they tried to hide. Not, until I faced the ghost head-on and forced him to tell me why he came back. The hours that followed were a parade of sirens, tape, and bureaucracy, but none of it could smother the fire burning inside me. This case wasn't over, no matter how neatly everyone wanted to fold it shut. At the liquor store, the forensic team moved quickly, snapping photos, tagging shell casings with yellow markers, logging every blood stain. Witnesses gave hurried, fragmented statements, their words already morphing into half-truths that would be tidied up later. The hostage was loaded into an ambulance, shaken but alive, and for the press that was enough. Police foil robbery, hostage saved. Headlines clean and simple, case closed. But I knew better, because the truth, the only truth that mattered, had vanished into smoke. The cameras went dark at the exact moment he appeared. No image, no evidence. Not a single officer saw him. Officially, he wasn't there. The ghost existed only in my memory, and that left me carrying a truth too heavy to bear alone. I stood outside the shattered glass door, watching my reflection ripple in the cracks. The man staring back at me didn't look like the cop I used to be. He looked hollow, fractured. The sergeant approached with a clipboard and said flatly, "Good work. Hostage saved, one suspect dead, another in flight. You did your job." I nodded, but the words rang like a curse. Was that really my job? To lie? To bury the impossible beneath tidy phrases? Back at the precinct, the official version was typed, signed, stamped. Attempted robbery. Rapid response. Hostage secured. One suspect neutralized. It fit the box. It fit the system. It also reeked of fraud. As I signed my name at the bottom, it felt less like ink on paper and more like blood on my hands. Once again, I was certifying a coffin with no body inside. When I finally stepped outside, the night was giving way to dawn. The sky was pale gray, the city stirring awake, unaware that something unnatural had walked its streets hours earlier. I sat behind the wheel of my cruiser, hands locked on the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. In the mirror, for a fleeting second, I thought I saw him in the back seat, grinning, the scar above his brow catching the first light of day. I blinked, and the seat was empty. Empty, but not gone, because he was inside me now, etched into my thoughts, refusing to leave. In the eyes of the department, I was just another cop who handled a tense night and got, the hostage out alive. But in my soul, I knew I had crossed a line. The case wasn't finished. It had only shifted, moved underground, into a place where paperwork couldn't reach. And so I made a promise, silent but absolute. I would find the truth. I would dig up the coffin with my own hands if I had to. I would pull every lie into the light. Whoever helped him vanish, whoever kept him alive, whoever thought they could bury the truth, they had just declared war on me. The official conclusion was clean, tidy, forgettable. But the real conclusion was something else entirely. That night, on Jefferson Street, I didn't just rescue a hostage. I woke up, and now I knew. I wouldn't rest until I unearthed the secrets they tried to lock away. Because ghosts don't vanish. They wait. and this one was waiting for me. The city woke the way it always does. Horns blaring, newspapers hawked on corners, commuters rushing through gray light as if the night before had never happened. But inside me, the world was different. The liquor store, the fractured glass, that impossible smile, all of it lingered like an open wound that refused to heal. I realized then that some scars aren't meant to close. They exist to remind us, every single day, of who we are and what we've yet to face. On paper, the case was finished, filed away, stamped, shelved under robbery resolved, clean, contained. But the truth, the real truth, was still out there, walking the streets, hidden in alleys, guarded by invisible hands, grinning in the dark. And I learned something brutal in that contrast. Being a cop means living in the gap between what's written and what's lived. I started seeing the city differently. Every anonymous face seemed to hold secrets. Every shadow in a back alley might have been his. I understood then that ghosts don't belong only to the past. They walk beside us, quiet, patient, waiting for their moment. And when they appear, they don't just come to haunt. They come to force us to choose, embrace the lie that keeps us comfortable, or bleed for the truth that won't let us sleep. That night transformed me in a way no badge, no oath, no training ever had. I had once believed in order, in protocols, in the neat geometry of rules. Now I knew better. The truth doesn't fit in reports. The truth spills, cracks, stains everything it touches. And anyone who dares to chase it must be ready to carry scars invisible to the rest of the world. My father's words came back to me with a clarity I had never understood until now. The worst enemies aren't the ones aiming a gun at you. They're the ones that live inside your head. He hadn't just been talking about war. He'd been talking about life, about nights like the one on Jefferson Street, about the weight you carry alone, unseen, but crushing. The lesson was sharp and final. There is no real ending as long as questions remain unanswered. The system can bury truths in coffins made of paper, but some dead never stay buried. Some come back, not to scare you, but to demand you look them in the eye and decide who you really are. I've decided. I am no longer just a cop bound by procedure. I am a man willing to go to the edge, even to my own ruin, because living without truth is worse than dying. And if this story has reached you, let it be a reminder. We all have ghosts. Some return to haunt, others return to teach. What you do with them defines you. So I'll leave you with this. The truth has a cost, but the lie costs even more. Never forget that. If you made it this far, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments which part of this story hit you the hardest. I want to know, have you ever faced a ghost that should never have come back?